in absolute stratigraphic order. So you want to record your surfaces, well, you do record your surfaces individually, you want to record your deposits on individual pieces of paper, because then when you rearrange things into different phases and so on, you can just move your information. Now, of course, you do that on the computer now, it's not a problem, but so we were locking in our stratigraphic information just by the format of the recording. But anyway, it's the most important point. I think we don't appreciate the degree to which every archaeological site is a landscape site. It's a landscape entity. And it has surfaces on which people live, just like we live on the surfaces of the landscape. So I thank you for that thing which I've forgotten to mention, but it's critical to the whole business. And in the end, one should be able to line up period surfaces in Tarragona with Madrid with somewhere else and so on and so on. Not that they're going to connect. Although some of our stratigraphic units do connect. If you take Highway 66 across the United States and then you go from Alaska down to Patagonia, you're going on stratigraphic units that Mother Nature never created, but which connect sites over several continents. And so anyway, it's an exciting business as far as I'm concerned, and even more so now because you have GIS, you have 3D scanning, you can record these surfaces quickly and efficiently and so on, and have them ready for when you've then done your analysis of your artifacts based upon your stratigraphic sequence. And all that happens with the sequence usually is that it grows in length based upon your absolute time scale. So it might be quite compact when you've just done it, but then when you start putting in lines across the surfaces for absolute dates, then it stretches up. And you might have a whole period where nothing happened at all, and so on. I can go on all night. More questions? Yes.
Professor Hals, thank you for being here. It's a
Well,
pleasure to have you here alive. I would like to ask you a very specific question, and it is when you come back to Winchester and you have to re-excavate the 17 notebooks and the 700 plans. How do you come to the idea that the surfaces are the key to understanding the stratification? I mean, is it based on your geological knowledge, or is there anything that you find in those notebooks that makes you say, Eureka, this is the key?
No, certainly not in the notebooks. The reason being that when the matrix was invented, I was still in the old mode of thinking. That is, I was an archaeologist. And what do archaeologists do? They dig things up. Surfaces don't exist unless you put them in a plan. So they're very easy to dig up. And so the surface business eventually came along because I couldn't unlock some of the relationships in the stratigraphic sequence because we weren't giving value to the surfaces. So, for example, here we have, this is a medieval pit, and it's cut down through Roman deposits and so on. So the bottom layer in this pit is on top of, say, 14th century is on top of a Roman layer of 1,000 years before or something. If you don't give value to the surface that is the actual whole, then this is always locked in relationship to that. And because of that, you cannot get your sequence to stand up correctly. One of the things that I keep meaning to buy, and I started looking in toy shops this morning, but when we were growing up, we had these little toys that were animals. And you pressed the bottom of the base of the animal fell down. Any of you remember those? Anyway, that's what you find, the fallen down animals, what you find when you're doing an archaeological dig. But as your children, remember you let the base off, the animal stood back up again. So the physical relationships became time relationships because the head of the giraffe, which was lying down like that on top of the base, all of a sudden goes up into its correct position. So if you give this surface of the inside of this glass its correct stratigraphic value, you give it a number, and you follow the rules, that surface takes its relationship from the highest level through which it was cut. So if you think of the inside of the glass as a little bit almost invisible plastic layer, and it's cut from here, and you pull it, all of these deposits go up to the top here. And the relationship between the physical deposit in the bottom and the Roman layer is broken. In relative time, it's true, but in the stratigraphic time, that relationship becomes redundant, and you have to get rid of it in order to get a clarified stratigraphic sequence. Otherwise, all you're doing is trying to produce in a diagram a three-dimensional section across the whole site, which is almost impossible to do. So, I was realizing that there were certain problems with this, and it was through discussions with colleagues where I said, look, what's going on here? We can't, these things they can't get freed up. And then, as I said, a colleague of mine said, look, we've started drawing every surface, even surfaces of deposits, not just these special negative surfaces, and all of a sudden that was the key to the whole thing. But if you don't give, you can get away with not numbering the surface of a deposit, although I don't recommend it, because at some point you should have, in your periods of your site, you should have all deposits in period 1, if you will, or period 2, because the first stage should be natural, say, period 2. So all your even numbers should be deposit periods and disuse periods, and all your odd numbers should be nothing but surfaces, so boxes with surfaces in them. So it was that became the key to being able to make a true stratigraphic sequence. Because what you're doing is basically, if you're just looking at it as a section, you're blowing the section apart, which you have to do, which you'll do sooner or later, because you'll blow it apart when you stick in your artifact data, because things will lift off of each other. So it was not in those notebooks. What was good about those notebooks is they created a massive problem of how to go and take something been excavated and make a final report, when no one knew that sorting it out meant you had to make the stratigraphic sequence. And we were still doing it verbally. So literally, you took a notebook and you opened and it said this layer is over that one and that one's over that one. And you thought, well, this belongs to this phase, so you rewrote it on a piece of paper. But by the time you turned a couple of pages, you couldn't remember what was over what. Picking me up thousands of these things, forget it. You didn't have the diagram, you were sunk. And so I spent 3 years working on that site, and I have to say that I probably didn't resolve it, and I probably can't, because they didn't do enough consistent recording with stratigraphic information so you can end up with a decent stratigraphic sequence. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you again, Mr. Harris. It's been a pleasure listening to you talking so clearly, especially because it must be no easier to talk about your life and your hard work after 40 years, more than 40 years, in just 1 hour. So, thank you again. And I would like to ask you about the future, not the past. Something
Yes.
weird in archaeology, right? I would like to know, what is your next challenge? Sorry about that.
Well, I have to say that one of my great disappointments was that when I went home to Bermuda and took a job running the museum, I didn't really do any more digging, which is a pity because I loved the digging. It was wonderful, wonderful stuff. And but as time goes on, as I'm sure the director of the National Museum will appreciate, you become an administrator. And so we've done a lot of archaeology at Bermuda, but it's with younger people, field schools, and so on. And my job is to come and look over the trench and say, oh, wonderful, oh, great stuff, and go away and have a drink. And when I came back home to Bermuda, the museum had just been started in a 10-acre fort in 1974, and I started in 1980. We've recently taken over another 6 acres of grounds, fortifications, and beautiful historic buildings built out of the local limestone. We've had the museum renamed as the National Museum of Bermuda because we've been doing the work of a national museum. So I now have more historic buildings to restore and raise the funds for. I will say that you have to understand that in Bermuda and a lot of places in the United States, you don't work for the government. We're private enterprises and so on. Archaeologically, one of the things I would like to do, aside from encouraging anybody who wishes to be encouraged and getting more languages on the website, it would be fun to have a fellowship and then travel the world and go and look at archaeological sites in as many countries as one could, and also look at the records and do a global audit of what archaeologists are doing in terms of recording this site. And this is not to criticize people, this is just to say, look, what are we doing? This business of archaeology is very, very important. A friend of mine who's an archaeologist in Australia used to say that as far as he was concerned, society was a big bulldozer with a big bucket, and archaeology was the cutting edge of the bucket. And then no other profession has allowed us to learn more about ourselves as human beings in the last 150 years than has archaeology. Now that might be a great claim, but the point is we're in a very, very important business, and this information in the earth is entrusted to us to capture as no one else can, because it's our profession. And our profession we're digging is to be stratigraphers, to take that site apart, correctly record it, so we can reconstruct the landscape, we can analyze the artifacts, and we can recover a big chunk of history, because that is our primary responsibility, aside from the fact that it's one of the most exciting things that I think we can do.
Okay, good afternoon again. Thank you for coming up. My question is about the future as well. After you did your thesis about metrics, near the new archaeology, today in the 21st century, do you think that the metrics needs a new revision, a new reading made by new archaeologists or by new young people? Here today, I mean, after 40 years. And thank you.
It is a very good question. The answer is twofold. One, that the matrix system, if you want to call it that, and by that I mean not just making the diagrams, but abiding by the laws of archaeological stratigraphy, excavating stratigraphically, locking in your artifacts stratigraphically, so on and so on and so on. It was true from the time it came into being, and by that I mean it's true in the scientific sense. It's a system that is true. If you put information into it that doesn't come out right, it's not the problem of the system, it's the problem with the information. And the fact that I'm here today, I think is testament that the system continues to carry through. Where the revision, not the revisions to the system will come, but the expansion of its use. And this continues, not almost, I wouldn't say on a daily basis, but I'm in Bermuda, I'm a bit sort of out of it in a way. You know, you don't hear about everything that's going on and all the wonderful work that a lot of people are doing. But the fact of the matter is that when on the website people download it, we ask them if they'll say something. And if you write that, I'll not delete it, but we ask them to say something. So of course you get people saying, I'm starting to work on rock art. I'm having problems with standing buildings. I'm a paint analysis, of which there have been several papers published in Spain on using the matrix for analyzing coats of paint. In other words, if you think about the range of activities that an archaeologist could be involved in analysis of, a lot of them are stratigraphic. And so you can apply the matrix to that because you're simply going by the principles of relative time, which came first, and then arranging a diagram in relationship to it. So I would say that the fact that this hall is full tonight means that the validity of what was written 40 years ago is still very valid, but that there are expansions, not of the basic system, but of its use. It's being applied to more and more things because it's a very, very useful tool, or so it's proved to be. I don't think you can revise the system because it's so simple to begin with. And again, you're only asking one question between these two. Which in relative time is earlier? You make your decision, it goes on to the diagram. So we can meet afterwards. And thank you very much for that question. That's a very good one. Well, look, thank you. Thank you all very much. No one else wants to say anything? Thank you all very much. It's always a pleasure to be here in situations like this, particularly with the younger generations. And it's a great honor you do to me to come out and listen to an old warhorse waffling on about something that happened 41 years ago. But you're archaeologists after all, and that's what you should be doing.